Welcome to View Thunder, curated movie reviews that celebrate art, design, and cinematic storytelling. My name is Kyle, and I thank you for tuning in. In part one, I gave some backstory on what led up to the movie star James Stewart's and director Anthony Mann's collaboration. If you haven't seen that episode, I recommend checking it out first. The Glenn Miller Story, 1954. It's a popular genre, but I'm just not a fan of biopics. In fiction, the author has more control over the very focused and simplified backstory for the characters. Obviously, real people have much more complex lives and experiences that inform their motivations and the direction their lives take than fictional characters. For a real person, it's hard to condense all of that down into a narrative that works without seeming incomplete. But when these pictures focus on a very narrow span of a person's life, the concept can actually work. That happens to be the case with Stewart and Mann's fifth collaboration, The Glenn Miller Story. The film covers the legendary band leader's latter half of his life, from being a young, struggling musician in the 1930s up to his tragic disappearance over the English Channel in 1944. Outside of the Western films that Stewart and Mann obviously enjoyed making together, The Glenn Miller Story really showcases Miller's life, his personality, and especially his music, with a genuine warmth. There's a sincere love of the material here. Each musical interlude has a unique setting and style, perfectly juxtaposing Miller's music thematically with his life at the moment. Mann is at his most assured and stylized with how he stages each set piece. The film is exceptionally well paced, beautifully filmed by, once again, William H. Daniels, and important people in Miller's life never just appear out of nowhere without some good story reason. My only negative critique is actress June Allison, who plays Miller's wife Helen. I'm just not a fan of her as a performer, and it really is as simple as that. But this is an excellent picture that is beautifully told and a highlight of this collaboration for sure. The Far Country, 1954. The sixth film Stewart and Mann made together is another gorgeously photographed, somewhat serviceable Western that takes place in the Yukon Territory. The story is set in 1896, with Stewart's Jeff Webster driving cattle to a gold rush town. After inadvertently interrupting a town hanging, he gets on the bad side of a corrupt judge, who then has it out for him the rest of the film. The movie isn't as straightforward as I make it out to be. It's chock full of character moments and choices that make story complications for everyone involved. John McIntyre portrays the corrupt judge, and he makes for a real nasty piece of work. Ruth Roman as a wealthy investor is really great here, even when her gorgeous outfits seem completely improbable so deep into the frontier. Stewart is good as always, but it stretches credibility that he has two women pining for his affection. But hey, Stewart landed the undying devotion of Grace Kelly that same year in Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window. So what do I know? The cast of Far Country is excellent. The production looks great. The cinematography, again by William Daniels, soars. Maybe I was too harsh calling it serviceable. But to take a common idiom and spin it around, in this case, I'd say the sum of the parts are greater than the total. Strategic Air Command, 1955. It's 1951, and Stewart's character Dutch Holland is a former World War II pilot who is now a well-known professional baseball player. Unfortunately, he chose to retain a commission in the Air Force Reserves, and during spring training, the Air Force comes calling. He's ordered back to active duty and must leave his successful baseball career behind for the better part of 2 years. He's not happy at all about this. His newlywed wife, played once again by a kind of annoying June Allison, is initially supportive, but as the reality of their situation sets in and the months drag on, she finds herself at her wit's end, all while her husband slowly warms to his new command position, the Cold War mission, and rediscovering his love of flying. And the film is just as dry as that all sounds. This is not a war movie. It's a peacetime movie. There is literally nothing happening to drive the plot forward other than training for stuff that never happens, which involves conducting long-distance bombing runs, test flights in brand new planes where they fly somewhere and then fly back. When there isn't an aircraft on the screen, it all comes to a halt with poorly written interpersonal drama. In an attempt to keep you enthralled, the story throws in a thrilling plane crash, with some pretty cool model work, I might add, to fool you into thinking something is happening, but that's about it. This is a very procedural and obvious propaganda piece. The setup being that the military service is initially frustrating and burdensome as the active duty personnel pine for civilian life. Throw in a hard-nosed, unsympathetic general concerned only with the mission for good measure. But once all those men stay in long enough, they'll really understand the mission and finally appreciate their service. Sure enough, Stewart's character eventually does a complete 180 and chooses re-enlistment over baseball, and does so without consulting his very unhappy wife. You see, the military is the only relationship that seems to matter in this film. The little woman, she'll get over it soon, which of course, she does. And just as she accepts it all and is as happy as ever, the story totally pivots and forces Holland out of the service anyway. What we're left with is a strange have your cake and eat it too type of happy ending. If you can get past all that and you like military aircraft, Strategic Air Command has a lot of really cool aircraft photography for you. The Man from Laramie, 1955. This is a legitimately great Western with a great setup, some shocking Old West violence, and interesting characters. The story centers on Stewart as Will Lockhart, who brings some supplies into town and hopes to leave with something other than his empty wagons and make some money on his return trip. A local woman tells him that the salt in a nearby dry lake bed is free for the taking. But as he and his men are loading the salt, Dave Wagaman, the impetuous, immature, and cruel son of a local cattle baron, shows up with his goons and accuses him of theft. Wagaman then burns Lockhart's wagons and, shockingly, guns down all of his mules. When Lockhart eventually makes it back to town, Mann stages an awesome oneer that tracks Lockhart walking out of a door, across the street, reaching up and dragging Dave Wagaman off his horse. An excellent fistfight ensues. Lockhart eventually gets promised compensation for his lost wagons and mules, but then refuses to leave town. We learn that he's on a quest searching for some vital information regarding the death of his brother, and may have found what he's looking for. It's a top-tier Western with a great performance by Arthur Kennedy as the elder Wagaman's ranch foreman Vic Hansbrough, returning for another go-around with Stewart. Alex Nichol as Dave Wagaman is a bit over-the-top cruel and whiny, but meets his end in a surprising way. And that's one of the aspects I like about this particular Western. While the plot points are fairly standard for the genre, Mann and writers Philip Yordan and Frank Burt arrange all the pieces in interesting, surprising, and sometimes shocking ways. And with that, the James Stewart and Anthony Mann era came to an end. 8 films in 5 years. The 1957 film Night Passage would have been their 9th film together, but the two men had a falling out during pre-production, resulting in Mann leaving the project. A new director took over, and the picture was made, but Stewart and Mann would never work together again. However, they left a beautiful, interesting, richly textured, and entertaining body of work, filled with many highlights for both their careers. As a side note, an aspect of these films I really enjoyed was seeing the same character actors become recurring players in several of these films over and over again. My favorites being J.C. Flippin and Harry Morgan showing up regularly. This is a group of films made by an excellent team, and though you'll find some films work more than others, the entire lineup is well worth your time. That brings to a close this episode of View Thunder. Thank you so much for tuning in to part 2 of this Stewart Mann retrospective. If you enjoyed my reviews, I'd appreciate you hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Until next time, remember to always stay for the end credits.